"Alistair," the vampire crooned, its voice dripping with mockery. "It's touching to see you cared enough to stay to watch the slaughter. Look at what a little misunderstanding can cause," it says, its arms motioning to the battlefield, its smile widening to a sickening grin. "I hope you enjoyed my little show." Einar, nostrils flaring, glared at the vampire. It was you all along," he said, his voice laden with comprehension and contempt. "That scent, it wasn't the Timberfangs. It was you, manipulating us." The vampire's laugh was cold and mirthless. Indeed, such simple creatures, so easily led astray. "And for what?" it mused, looking around at the destruction and fallen werewolves. "For a game, for a jest, because I could, and because it gives me great joy to see Alistair so tormented." Einar's blue eyes blazed. "You caused this. You set clan against clan, all for your twisted amusement." A dark chuckle echoed through the clearing. It was a work of art, really. Watching as tensions built, as trust eroded. And now, this beautiful chaos. All because Alistair here, it said, gesturing mockingly toward me, decided to cross my path. Einar's rage was palpable. "You will pay for this," he swore, taking a threatening step forward, limping but undeterred. The vampire merely smirked, seemingly unworried. "Oh, I doubt that. But do try. It'll add to the entertainment." As the moonlight peeked through the dark clouds that seemed to accompany the vampire's entrance, a flash of silver from the ground caught the vampire's eye. With swift, graceful motions, it bent down and picked up Einar's dropped blade, twirling it with a theatrical flourish, as its mocking grin never falters. Einar's anger roiled off him in waves, and with a pained roar, he lunged at the vampire. Every instinct within me screamed to join the fight, to protect, to avenge. The world became a blur of motion, Einar and I, a united force against the dark terror that had manipulated us from the shadows. As the battle raged, our movements synchronized. Each time the vampire aimed for Einar, I was there, parrying or diverting the strike. When he tried to corner me, Einar's powerful form was a bulwark, keeping him at bay. Despite the evident strength and speed of the vampire, the two of us, working together, seemed to keep him on the defensive. But the vampire was clearly relishing every moment, every parry, every dodge. He was playing with us, and as the battle continued, the weight of my previous wounds and the intensity of the fight began to press down on me. Einar, limping and laboring from his injuries, wasn't faring much better. Gathering every ounce of my strength, I expertly feigned a move to the left, drawing the vampire's attention away from my true intention. Harnessing my momentum, I surged forward, the cool weight of my runic sword singing through the air. The blade met its mark, biting deep into the vampire. The force of my attack caused it to stagger backward, its face contorted in a mixture of pain and astonishment. As it regained its balance, it landed precariously close to where Hawken lay, lifeless and defeated. The vampire looks at the downed alpha. A malicious grin creeps over its face. It turns back to me, our gazes locked, my eyes, no doubt, a maelstrom of emotions. Anger, determination, and hope, while it's glinted with malice, but suddenly overshadowed by the onset of something else. And then, just as the vampire was preparing to retaliate, an odd expression crept over its face. An expression I'd never seen on it before. Confusion, apprehension, dread. It glanced about, as if it could sense an impending threat, a change in the air that only a creature of its supernatural sensitivity could ever hope to detect. Suddenly, the ground shook as the apparently dead Hawken sprung into action. His immense wolf form, a marvel of power and agility, pounced on the vampire, taking it completely by surprise. The sheer weight of Hawken's muscular frame easily bore the vampire down, pinning it with an unyielding force. The sword the vampire wielded flew up in the air, the blade piercing the snow inches from its face. Hawken's massive jaw hovered menacingly close to the vampire's throat, each fang glinting in the moonlight. His deep growl resonated through the clearing, a chilling promise of retribution. As Einar and I approached, the vampire's eyes darted between the imposing form of Hawken above him and us. The shock was evident on its face, a mix of disbelief and fury. "How?" it spat out, its voice a hiss. "How is this possible?" I smiled, a triumphant smirk playing on my lips. "Did you really think we'd let you get away with this?" I began, my tone dripping with contempt. "You underestimated us." "This," I waved my arms indicating the entire battlefield, mimicking the vampire's previous gesture. "This was all a ruse to draw you in." I couldn't help but relive the moment I had shared with Hawken in the cave. The fear, the uncertainty, and then the spark of an idea. "Hawken," I had said, "we need to address the true threat. The vampire. I have a plan, but I need your full trust and cooperation. We'll stage a battle with Einar's clan, a battle fierce enough to draw blood, to create chaos, but not to claim lives. We'll rely on the vampire being deceived by the intensity of the clash, assuming its work is done for it." Hawken had been hesitant, but when I explained further, he saw the logic. I continued, "That wolf pelt it's draped in, if it's strong enough to fool werewolves, it's probably constantly overwhelming its own senses. Add the mayhem and bloodshed of a fight to the mix, and it may not be able to discern the still beating hearts on the battlefield." Then Einar's howl breaks our conversation. Recognizing the need to communicate with Einar discreetly was of utmost importance. Hawken's sword, with its broad, flat surface, provided the perfect canvas. My fingers brushed the cool ground of the cave, finding a small, sharp-edged rock that seemed almost crafted for this purpose. With rushed work, I began etching into the blade, the rock biting into the metal with a quiet, scraping sound. Each stroke was deliberate, each letter meticulously formed. The act of inscribing wasn't just a message, it was a plea, an offering of trust. As I carved, etching into the blade our last hope, the sword seemed to take on a new life, becoming a beacon of unity and trust. The message was crafted solely for Einar, an entreaty to look beyond past grievances, urging him to recognize the pressing darkness we now faced together. And during our intense duel, as Einar looked down at the inscription, in that fleeting moment, he chose trust over suspicion. Returning to the present, I smile at my foe. The vampire's eyes darted sideways, catching the gleam of the blade embedded in the snow-dusted forest floor. The moon's soft light glinted off the meticulously carved words, revealing the secret message hidden in plain sight for all to see. Not Hawken. Her killer lurks unseen, watching, feign battle, draw them near. Trust me, old friend. For Hildy, the vampire's pallid features contorted, its crimson eyes widening as the weight of the subterfuge bore down on it. A complex series of emotions played out on its face: shock, betrayal, and finally, rage. "You, all of this was a charade?" it asked, every word soaked in disgust. Einar, having limped closer, smiled at me. "You played your cards well, Alistair," his voice carrying a tinge of respect. The vampire, still trapped beneath the looming weight of Hawken, let out a low, sinister chuckle. "You think you've won?" Einar stepped closer, his eyes cold and hard. "Yes," he said calmly. "And we've proven that when faced with a common enemy, our clans can work together." The vampire's gaze darted from Einar to me, then to the expanse of the battlefield. There, amidst the moonlit glade, supposedly fallen warriors were no longer static. Slowly, deliberately, they began to rise, their injuries perhaps not as dire as they had seemed. Some leaned on others for support, but their eyes, sharp and focused, were locked onto the trapped vampire. The deceptive calm that had initially masked the gravity of his situation was shattered. The vampire's chest heaved rapidly, the reality of the trap he'd walked into becoming undeniably clear. All around him, the forces that he believed he had bested were regrouping, and the walls of his overconfidence crumbled. It felt as if the very sands of time had come to a halt, every eye riveted on the menacing figure before us. The vampire's lips curled back into a sinister grin, revealing unnaturally sharp teeth, and its eyes, once deep and void, now pulsed with an ominous crimson luminescence. As a swirling miasma of red and black tendrils emanated from beneath the creature, the very atmosphere of the clearing grew thick and charged. An aura of ancient malevolence permeated the air, casting a suffocating shroud over all present. Hawken, the formidable alpha, was momentarily caught off guard as the vampire summoned a surge of monstrous strength, hurling him off with such force that it looked almost effortless. The sheer force with which the vampire expelled him was astonishing, a raw display of power that belied its size. Hawken's usually sure-footed form tumbled uncontrollably, his claws scratching and digging furrows into the earth in a desperate bid to arrest his movement. Clouds of snow and debris rose in his wake as he skidded across the terrain, the sheer momentum defying his efforts. Almost in perfect unison, a chorus of enraged growls erupted from the gathered werewolves. Like a torrential river suddenly released from its bounds, they charged en masse, their fur bristling and eyes aflame with protective fury. These beasts, bound by blood and loyalty, moved as one, each determined to attack the looming threat. These beasts, bound by blood and loyalty, moved as one, each determined to attack the looming threat. The vampire, bathed in the eerie glow of the moon, paused for a brief moment as a sinister swirl of red-black miasma enveloped it. It almost seemed to feed off this otherworldly energy, its stature becoming even more imposing. With a deliberate motion, the creature raised its arm, fingers straightened and positioned tightly next to each other. They remained distinct, yet together they took on the lethal purpose of a single, piercing weapon, sharp and deadly. The edges of its fingers gleamed malevolently, ready for the kill, focused on Hawken ahead of them. This, combined with the swirling miasma around the vampire, painted a scene of nightmarish beauty. The ethereal red and black mist seemed to pulse and dance, mirroring the vampire's own anticipation. It leaped, the miasma ribboning through the air. Every movement was calculated, deliberate, and executed with deadly precision, making it abundantly clear that this creature had mastered the art of using its very body as a weapon. Hawken, who had just regained their balance, looked up just as the deadly talons were about to make contact. Suddenly, a blur of black interjected. Einar, with every ounce of his strength and will, leaped into the path of the assault, taking the full supernatural force of the attack. Leaped into the path of the assault, taking the full brunt of the attack. The force was so great, and the vampire's strike so powerful, that it pierced through Einar's muscular frame with a sickening ease. A harsh yelp filled the air, echoing the pain and sacrifice of the Winterpelt clan alpha. The battlefield, which had been a cacophony of snarls and movement, was now silent, all eyes fixed on the wounded wolf and the malevolent creature responsible. With emotion that felt almost theatrical, the vampire withdrew its arm from Einar, dark blood dripping from its fingers. It raised its blood-soaked hand to its lips, licking it with deliberate slowness, its eyes never leaving mine. The satisfaction in that gesture, the blatant display of dominance and victory, sent a chill down everyone's spine. The vampire's malevolent grin seemed to stretch even further, revealing even more of its razor-sharp fangs. "What a lovely game we played, Alistair," it cooed, its voice dripping with malicious satisfaction. "But this is where I take my leave." Before my very eyes, its form began to distort and shift, bones crackling and skin stretching, until it transformed into the grotesque figure of a colossal bat, humanoid but monstrously muscled and armed with fierce talons. With a powerful beat of its wings, it took to the skies, the moonlight reflecting off its leathery hide as it aimed for the distant mountain range. Hawken's recovery was quick, his alpha instincts kicking in. He barked an order, urging his pack to pursue the escaping monster. But, knowing the danger we all faced, I raised my voice to counter his command. "No!" I shouted, hoping the weight behind my words would be enough. Hawken fixed me with a piercing look, his yellow eyes shimmering with anger and defiance. "Do you think we will just let that creature escape?" He growled, every muscle in his body poised for action. I met his gaze firmly, drawing a deep breath before responding. "None of us, not even as a united pack, are in a position to face that beast now, not without more deaths. We're exhausted, and many of us are wounded. We have to regroup." Despite my plea, some of the more battle-hungry wolves from both clans, driven by their insatiable warrior spirit, charged into the forest, sending their challenges into the night as they chased the retreating vampire. Deep down, I feared for them. While the others gathered around Hawken, lending him support, I knelt beside Einar, the gravity of his wounds evident. Desperately, I tried to halt the bleeding, calling out for some wolves to fetch specific herbs that might stanch the flow. But then, a gentle hand rested on my shoulder. I looked up to see a woman bearing an uncanny resemblance to Hildy. Her eyes, so much like the girl who could only be her daughter's, were now filled with tears. "Stop, Alistair," she whispered, her voice thick with sorrow. "He's gone." He met his end on the battlefield, as he always wished. Heart heavy, I gazed down at Einar, my dear friend and ally. The loss felt overwhelming. As the night deepened, both clans, previously at loggerheads, united in their shared grief and newfound respect. The immediate battle might have ended, but our war against the true adversary had just begun. The following days brought about profound changes. Grief hung in the air, palpable and thick. Despite the sorrow, it was remarkable to see the once divided packs come together in unity. Under Hawken's leadership, the Timberfangs and Winterpelts merged into one mighty force, christened the Winterfangs. Their bond, forged in the crucible of war and loss, was now unbreakable. The few brave souls who had ventured off to chase the monstrous vampire returned, wearied and disheartened. Their hunt had been fruitless. The cunning beast had managed to elude them amidst the craggy peaks and hidden valleys of the mountain range. Yet, even in their disappointment, they returned to a pack that stood stronger and more unified than before. Einar's final resting place was atop a hill that overlooked the vast territory he once called home. Next to him lay his beloved daughter, their graves adorned with the choicest flowers and mementos of their lives. Their headstone, the sword used to prevent a war. Hawken, now the leader of the combined clan, swore an oath of vengeance under the silver light of the moon, vowing to protect the lands and its inhabitants from the shadow of the vampire. Once some days had passed and the dust had settled, I felt a pull to move on. The events had taken a toll on my spirit, and I knew I needed to continue my own journey. The Winterfangs had grown strong and could stand without me. As I packed up my camp, preparing for another journey, I discovered a fur coat neatly folded on my makeshift bed. The very coat the vampire had worn as a disguise. One last taunt from the malevolent creature, signifying our battle is far from over. It a chilling reminder that my adversary was still out there, watching, waiting, and plotting. I gripped the coat, its coarse fur rough against my palm. With a deep breath, I cast it into the campfire, watching as the flames consumed it. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both danger and promise. But one thing was clear: the battle against darkness was far from over. I would be ready. As I began my descent from the frigid domain of the Winterfangs, the crunch of snow beneath my boots seemed to echo the weight of the memories I was leaving behind. The landscape, painted in stark whites and muted grays, contrasted with the warmth of the camaraderie I had found there. My breath fogged up in the cold air, and every exhale felt like releasing a fragment of the heavy burdens I carried. Pausing for a moment, I cast a glance over my shoulder. There, silhouetted against the silver sheen of the snowy horizon, was the unmistakable figure of Hawken. His wolfish form was still, a guardian statue watching over his territory. We were separated by distance, yet the connection, the shared understanding we had forged, felt as tangible as ever. Then, as if on cue, a series of haunting howls cut through the crisp air. It began with a singular, melancholic note, Hawken's voice, but soon it was joined by others, a symphony that seemed to span the entirety of the Winterfang territory. The harmony wasn't one of sorrow, but of gratitude, camaraderie, and a vow of continued alliance. Each note served as a reminder that in a world filled with the uncanny and inexplicable, I have allies, even among the supernatural. The realization brought a warmth that contrasted with the cold, and I felt an unexpected smile tug at the corners of my lips. With a final nod towards the distant figure of Hawken, I turned my face to the path ahead. The journey was far from over, but wherever it took me, I knew I was not alone. The howls of the Winterfangs would forever echo in my heart, a timeless promise of friendship and support.